κοινωνία σε γενναίες ομογενών.
And now, Matters of Conscience, hosted by the Very Reverend Eugene Pappas, educator, ecumenist, and activist in international social issues. Matters of Conscience is intended to cause our listening audience to consider and resolve issues of personal and collective faith and ethics facing the people and the nation.
Hello, New York. Hello, world. This is Father Eugene Pappas with Matters of Conscience on Cosmos FM. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me my Russian tovarich, my Russian friend and comrade, Professor Sergey Grushchin of St. Petersburg, the instructor of advanced technology. Welcome, Professor Sergey Grushchin.
Thank you, Father Eugene. You're more than tovarich to all of us. You know
more than tovarich, which means comrade. Let me begin my program by saying to everybody, and Serge, if you would answer me, Christos Anesti.
Alithos Anesti.
Christos Voskresye.
Воистину воскресе.
Christ is risen.
Truly he is risen, Father.
That's the greeting that we give throughout the world for the next 40 days. Let's say one more time to get all excited.
Pascha is here.
Pascha is here. Christos Anesti.
Alithos Anesti.
Christos Voskresye.
Воистину воскресе.
Christ is risen.
Truly he is risen.
Today we are going to discuss a different type of resurrection. It's the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Now, some of you weren't born during that period. I, of course, remember it as a child. The good professor, of course, wasn't even a glimmer in his parents' eyes at that time.
Thank you, Father. But my family was present
yes,
at
but
that
you
time.
are not. You are not. You know it only by history and recorded history. Let me mention that May 8th and 9th, 2005, this weekend, marks the 60th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, the war that brought untold sorrow to mankind globally. It was not only a global battle that exceeded in scale all the previous armed conflicts in world history, but there collided not only different interests of states and even not so much the different ideologies, but the diametrically opposed, irreconcilable approaches to the very basis of man's existence. For the first time in history, the stake in this struggle of World War II was the preservation of the life of whole peoples, whole nations, whole races. The war turned into the greatest tragedy for the peoples of Europe and the Asian continent. The whole world, regardless of whose side they fought on, it was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. Not a single family, not a single life story was untouched by its consequences, and we know that here in the United States. On November 22nd, 2004, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted without a vote Resolution 59/26 declaring May 8th and 9th as a time of remembrance and reconciliation. From now on, these days will be marked annually as a tribute to the memory of the victims of World War II. The main outcome of the war, World War II, or as the Russians call it, the Great Patriotic War, is not just the victory of one coalition of states against another. In essence, it was the victory of the forces of construction and civilization over the forces of destruction and barbarity. It was the victory of life over death. Professor Sergey, it's the victory of Pascha, life over death.
Absolutely, resurrection.
The creation of the anti-Hitler coalition might rightfully be called the biggest diplomatic breakthrough of its time. The coalition became an example of the rallying of states, nations, republics, democracies, and kingdoms of different ideologies and political systems in the face of a common mortal danger, which was Nazism. The opponents of Nazism were united by a common understanding of the fact that evil has to be resisted together, allowing no compromises, no concessions, and no separate deals. The commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II gains a special meaning today. It dictates the need for international community to consolidate itself in the face of contemporary threats. The contemporary threat of this century has begun with international terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, and transnational organized crime. The end of the war inspired nations in 1945 and thereafter to establish the United Nations, a global mechanism for safeguarding peace and security. Its charter generally recognized the basis of contemporary international law and offered us a fundamental code of conduct. Today's challenge, as well as the preceding historic experience, demonstrates that there is no alternative but to further the enhancement of international understanding and to secure the equitable world pattern in an era of globalization to enhance international peace and law. This celebration, May 8th and 9th, Professor Grushchin, is something new to us in America. We do observe, of course, our annual Memorial Days, our tributes to the war dead. But what is it like to see Victory Day in Russia, and what does it mean to the Russian people? There is a summit going on right now. 50 nations, major powers have sent representatives to Moscow, including our President Bush and the European Union and 50 nations all over the world to observe a celebration, a victory over the great patriotic war against the Nazis. What was it like for you as a child? What does it mean for you today as an adult?
Well, of course, it's completely different from the American perspective, from the V-Day as we know it here. And I would even go further, and to say that it's even different from other European countries. First of all, Russian people call this war not just World War II, it's the great patriotic war to them, meaning it touched more than every household and every family. It means more to them. That's number one.
Well, when you're speaking about meaning more to them, I don't think it means more to them than to anybody else, but certainly for them it meant the survival of their nation.
The survival of their nation and the survival of their families, because statistically, at least one family, one household on the territory of the former Soviet Union has lost at least one human life.
27 to 30 million former members of the Soviet Union were killed during that period.
Yes, we'll return to our numbers a little bit later. Let me just tell you about a regular, in a way, prior to this 60th anniversary celebration, V-Day or Victory Day. We call it as the Victory Day, May Day, May 9th in Russia. First of all, it's like July 4th here. It's like an Independence Day and the Memorial Day.
Mixed together. It's the two holidays interplaying.
Absolutely. Every town, let me even put it this way, every village, small town or smaller town on a smaller scale, holds a parade. There is a parade with veterans in their best uniforms, with all their medals, walking together, kind of resembling togetherness.
Demonstrating solidarity.
Yes, solidarity, of course. Well, we have this parade, we have speeches. People were so touched by this thing that they decided, again, I'm talking about the Commonwealth of the Soviet Republic, they have decided to organize the memorial as a day to remember for future generations.
It's an international date now, and certainly by the UN resolution, it has become an international celebration. And as you mentioned before, it's a Memorial Day and the 4th of July put together, because on this day, from what I understand, there's fireworks, there's picnics, there's parades, but there's also visitations to the cemeteries to place flowers, flags, and memorial tribute.
Absolutely. Actually, I was driving towards this link, this connection between different generations. Former veterans, they give speeches, and they appeal to their youth, to our youth, just to remember this, and they kind of share the experience.
Ironically, tonight I'm going to be a speaker at the 7th Regiment dinner on Park Avenue. I'm a member of that regiment. I was a
Congratulations!
Yes, thank you.
I'm a second lieutenant as well, Father.
And they have me speaking tonight and offering not only an invocation but a commentary on this particular observance. And I remember as a child the end of the war, 1945. I was but a child myself, and I remember the excitement that morning of people running into the street, banging on pots and pans and honking horns and shouting from rooftops, and people embracing in the streets. I remember it vividly because as a child I had never seen a demonstration like that before, and my neighborhood coming together and people parading up and down the street and kissing and hugging and tears, joyous tears flowing from their eyes. I remember that distinctly, and I was but 5 years old. And that event that I can remember vividly took place on Coney Island Avenue in Brooklyn. And those of you who are from Brooklyn and know Coney Island Avenue, you can just glimpse in your memory and nostalgically remember that event.
It resembles again. Let's get back to the V-Day in Russia. We have fireworks. We have dancing and eating and drinking. Okay, of course, after commemoration of the dead, of the war veterans, the ones that sacrificed their lives so we could be here in a way, and of course the Russian people could be there as well.
Tell me something about your family's involvement in World War II. You're from St. Petersburg, Russia. At that time, it was called Leningrad. And what happened to your family in Leningrad during World War II?
Yeah, actually, we can talk for hours about this. I'm talking about St. Petersburg, or Leningrad, as it used to be known at that time. This city is known as the only city that survived the siege. Again, Germans. Well, first of all, St. Petersburg or Leningrad is situated in the very western part of Russia. In the very beginning of the war, German troops, again, without any declaration of war, they advanced further into the Russia from the west. St. Petersburg or Leningrad, again, was kind of left surrounded by German troops, and it was held hostage in a way under the siege.
The entire city. 2.5 million people.
Yes, for 90 days. For 900 days. For 900 days, more than almost 3 years.
Almost 3 years. 900 days being under siege. How did they survive since the supplies were not coming into the city?
Well, there was a lake called Ladoga Lake that freezes during winter time. And there was a very narrow path that people used to carry supplies in the city.
To survive,
yes.
Foodstuffs,
yes. But again, the whole city was under the siege, and 1 million people, I repeat, 1 million people from my home city died there.
1 million out of 2.5 million.
1 million out of 2.5 people. Yes.
So obviously, every family was affected by the siege of St. Petersburg, of Leningrad, and therefore you have a particular memory of this through your family. Your grandparents obviously lived through this.
Yes, my grandmother, my dad's mom, she happened to be there as a teenager, and she survived. The whole siege, and recently, actually, it happened. I think it happened when she was 65, like 8 years ago. She was given a medal to commemorate this event, a medal as a survivor of this siege.
Of the siege of Leningrad. And
yes.
The government gave her that medal because she was a survivor of that particular episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
I'm sure that it'll be treasured by your family and certain by your children's children yet to come, because that's a distinction from the government.
Absolutely. It's a big treasure for my family. My grandfather holds it now, and basically it symbolizes my family's determination to survive.
Let me give our number out for those who would like to share their commentary with us regarding the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II, a Victory Day celebration, and the summit that is being held in Moscow these days. Our number here is 718-204-8900. I'm sure there are some veterans out there who would like to share their emotional recollection. Tell us more about the human sacrifice of Russia during World War II. And while I mention that question, let me also significantly point out that even the former Soviet Union states like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Georgia for that matter, some of these states are not participating in the victory celebrations in Moscow. Can you elaborate why they are not participating, since they too were under the attack of the German Nazis during that period?
Yeah, maybe we could return to numbers, to sacrifices a little bit later. I think
we can incorporate it.
Of course, we can incorporate it. Well, throughout the history, it is known that fascism was killed in a way by Allied forces, and Baltic states invited the Soviet army, the Russian army, to go to them and to get rid of Germans. And in a way, they feel that they were occupied by communists right after World War II in 1945.
So what you have here,
Yes.
more clearly, is that the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and possibly other states, felt that the Russian Communist Army, liberating them from the Nazis, then subjected them to communist occupation for the next 60 years.
Yes.
Or whatever it was.
That's what they say.
That's what they say, and that's what they feel, and obviously they're not participating.
Yes, I think it's a bit sad, because again, I used to spend a lot of time with my family and alone in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and I didn't really feel. Well, first of all, it was part of the Soviet Union, and I was there after they became independent states. I don't really personally, I never felt that they feel this hostility towards Russia. I mean,
well, they may not feel hostility toward Russia, but did they feel a fidelity, if you will, to the Nazis or to the Germans? Because I have some documentation in front of me that will probably shock you.
Estonians in particular.
Yeah, the Estonians in particular. The Estonians, in these past few years, they are erecting statues and war memorials to the SS. Estonian Guard. These are their heroes. They're saying these SS Estonian Guards were the ones who cooperated with the Nazis against the Russians, and that's their hero. Or in certain areas of Latvia and Lithuania, possibly there's Russians. There's sympathy for the German cause.
Well, I think that's another ethical issue that needs to be discussed. Maybe we could spend some time during our next radio program to talk about this. And again, I feel that I'm too liberal by calling it an ethical issue, if you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. By mentioning Leningrad, I do apologize now, it's known as St. Petersburg, and 27 million lives lost. Again, it's not Russia. Ukrainians, Belarus, Georgians,
Armenians,
people from Kazakhstan, Armenians, Azerbaijani.
We're speaking of the whole Soviet sphere of influence that was involved in this invasion by the Nazis.
Absolutely.
The ones who were fighting against the Nazis, of course, were not only Russian blood. You had Ukrainians, you had Georgians, you had Armenians, you had all the Soviet republics were involved in the Soviet army.
Absolutely. Don't forget, now in Russia we have 89 autonomic regions, just like states in the United States.
89?
89.
We have enough problems with 50 states. You have 89.
Absolutely. And again, I just want to get
What do they call the 89 united? What is it called? It's called the
Russian Federation.
The Russian Federation.
And again, I just want to
It's a confederation then.
Yes, in a way. In a way. I just want to get this idea to our listeners. Again, there are a couple of hundreds different nationalities with different languages, their own culture, and they're all mixed together in a way. And it's not just Russians fighting against Germans, all of them.
Did you sense when you were in Estonia, you mentioned that you had been in Estonia many times as a youth and certainly in later years, any sympathy toward the German cause, the Nazi cause, or to German appeasement?
Yes. A lot of people, first of all, a lot of people speak German. A lot of people speak German language, and
But that's not their national tongue.
That's not their national tongue, no. Their national tongue is Estonian, very close to Finnish, but yes, I felt it. One more time, let me mention that since we're in New York, I have a lot of friends from the Baltic states here, from Lithuania, from Estonia, from Latvia, and they want, when they meet with me, I'm as democratic as possible. Let's talk English, let's talk Swedish, let's talk French, let's talk German. They want to talk Russian.
They want to speak Russian because they want to identify with the Russian.
Yes.
The Russian conscience.
Yes, and in a way, I mean, a lot of people may disagree with me, but I feel it as a big brother. I'm talking about the Russia uniting all the satellite countries around it, and I think that's how we should perceive this Russian Federation as a big brother.
Let's explain, why do we have different dates regarding a Victory Day and VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, being observed by the Russians and then by the rest of Europe?
Well, that's another, we can continue this topic of brothers and sisters. Since we have so many brothers and sisters, they are all over the world, and the war has spread itself. Again, we are coming back to the World War II, to the end. All over the world, the war stretched itself over all world zones. And
in particular, it even was in Japan, and of course in Asia, and so therefore every time zone was celebrating the victory at their time, and of course it covered the international dateline.
Yes. By the way, V-Day, the difference, V-Day and VE Day. The Victory Day, and VE Day, the Victory Day in Europe. That's number one. And the actual military surrender agreement for the German armed forces was signed at a schoolhouse at Reims, France, at 2:41 a.m. local time on May 7th, 1945. Then it was to take effect, according to this agreement, on May 8th, at 11:01 p.m.
The next day.
Yes, but again, it was a world war that stretched itself over many time zones. And as let's talk about the U.S. government point of view first. The U.S. government was concerned that that the final document, this document that I just mentioned, that it took place at 8:41 p.m. Eastern What time on May 6, 1945. Because here in the United States, we're a little bit in front of everybody regarding time. Europe is a little bit behind because of the time difference. But to complicate matters further, there was another document signed at Reims, France. After this document, there was another surrender ceremony in Berlin, Germany, the next day. Because the Soviet Union at this time, the Russian side, regarded the first document as a surrender only on the Western Front. And then the Russian side decided that all of these documents take effect on May 9th, midnight.
So
May 9th.
It actually began on the 6th and ends on the 9th.
That's why, again, in Russia, the biggest day is May 9th.
The famous photos of the end of the Second World War. Of course, we have the raising of the flag on the island of Iwo Jima. You know, this was a battle that was significant for the fall of Japan. The raising of that wonderful stars and stripes over Iwo Jima. We have that wonderful, beautiful picture picture in Times Square, the sailor kissing a young woman on the middle of Times Square at the end of World War II, and the hysteria and the exhilaration of all the people. We have the Soviet soldiers shaking hands on the ruined bridge over Germany's Elbe River in the close of World War II. That wonderful picture that was taken April 25th, 1945, shows the union of the two sides of the war, the Soviet and, of course, the Allied forces meeting at the Elbe River in Germany, April 25th, 1945, which was a harbinger of the end of the war, because a week or two later, it all came to a halting conclusion.
Let me just interrupt you for a minute and tell you that this is a very known fact in Russia, and a lot of people appeal to this as well. You know, a shake hand with American forces, not with the light forces even, with American forces in 1945, just like you said, in April.
Well, when the actual signatures were applied to the paper and the war came to a concluding end, at the American embassy in Moscow, thousands of people gathered outside the embassy on that day in 1945, shouting in their best English, "Long live America, long live the memory of President Roosevelt, long live President Truman." And I don't think we've heard that since then, but certainly, it was the outpouring of the Russian people saying, "We have jointly conquered the double-headed snake," because there was a head of the snake toward the east and a head of the snake toward the west, and that is the snake of Nazi fascism. Let me ask you another question, if I may, Professor. What do you believe is in Russia, what do you believe is becoming a stronger democratic country, or are you concerned about some of the events that have caused some to say that President Putin is pushing away democratic reform? I know Bush is going to speak about this either privately or publicly with President Putin, the democratic reforms that the Americans would like to see employed and applied in the former Soviet Union, now called the Russian Federation.
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's a very great sign that the President of the United States, W. Bush, that he's coming to Moscow, first of all, to commemorate all the sacrifices of Russian people and European people during this, European nations during World War II. And I'm sure that he will talk with President Putin about some of the issues that were discussed already, if you remember, in Bratislava not so long ago, in the end of February.
We did a program on that issue. And, of course, the democracy is among first priorities in these talks. But I think that... Let me defend President Putin for a second. I mean, that would be normally your job, but I want to defend President Putin for a second, because I think Americans, we like to think that everybody should think and act and respond the way we do. And we have our own consciousness and
which is very American.
Which is very American, of course. Yes. We want everybody to drink Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, and
eat pizza.
And eat, that's not American. That's Italian. No, eat a Big Mac. That's American. But certainly our form of democracy may not be able to be exported and applied in every condition and circumstance in every country of the world. And I think what's happening is that the Russians are inventing, if you will, their own type of democracy, just as much as we in America are constantly reinventing or adjusting our own democracy. That's why we have a Supreme Court that's constantly interpreting, quote, our Constitution. I think, Gregory, are we going down to the wire regarding our station identification? Gregory's smiling at me, and I think we'll do that right now.
Η ώρα είναι 2.
This is WNYE, New York.
Thank you, Gregory. So we've given out our our station call, and of course the time. But let's get back. Those who want to call us and give us their opinion and their expressions of solidarity with us on this victory over World War II, this celebration, the 8th and 9th of May. You may call us at 718-204-8900. You're listening to Professor Sergey Grushchin from St. Petersburg, a native of St. Petersburg and an instructor at the College of Advanced Technology. And my tovarich.
Thank you, Father Eugene.
Tovarich, comrade. Tovarich.
Yes, I would like to continue to talk about President Putin's position.
Yes, please.
Well, first of all, I agree. The Russian Federation does not have to follow the same path or to follow the same steps of democracy as the United States do, or United States as a nation does, just because it could be slightly different. And I think that Russia has made historical progress since the breakup of the Soviet Union in the last 15 years. It's been a difficult transition, don't forget. And I think there have been both significant steps, more steps forward than backward, as Russian people sort out their future. Well, in the American mass media recently, there were talks about the concentration of power in the Kremlin. I like this expression, and
we have a concentration of power in Washington D.C. The Pentagon, Washington D.C.
Let me snap back.
Yeah.
Don't you have a power of concentration in the Washington D.C.? I mean, this is
I have a power of concentration right here on Cosmos FM.
Absolutely.
But Sergey, before we get on with your commentary, let me get to some speakers who are trying to get into us right now. Let's get to Sergey on line one. Sergey.
Yes, sir.
Sergey, where are you calling from?
I am calling from New York right now.
New York City. Okay,
Yes.
give us your commentary, if you will.
Well, the first thing I heard you guys talking about celebration of May 9th. I was observing, I live in the United States for 15 years now. This is my 15th year. And the more I see the younger generation that are growing up in the United States, I don't think that they even know what the May 9th means in Russia. And especially as of right now, modern Russia is, or new Russians, as we call them, growing up over there, learning English and...
Sergey, what's today's date?
Today's 9th.
Today's, what is it? No, today?
It's 7th.
Today is the 7th, Sergey. Are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, today is May 7th. I could tell you that most Americans wouldn't know the significance of yesterday, May 6th. So how would they know the significance of May 8th or 9th or 6th or 5th or anything? Because we as Americans, unfortunately, I've had many educators on this program, we do not have a perspective of historical significance as a nation, unfortunately. We live from day to day. We're always looking for a better tomorrow, but we never look backwards and say, let us learn from our mistakes. And history is on the back burner of our school system. It's a program that's in the curriculum, but it's not given emphasis. And you're very correct that what's going to happen in the future, well, we have to adjust our educational system so that young people will understand what World War II meant, did, and could have left as a legacy had we all fallen to the Nazi fascist regime.
Yeah, I was going to thank Sergey for this call and just to tell him that this is maybe your job to talk to young people and to
talk to your children and your children's children.
And that's what we are trying to do right here, right now.
Thank you, Sergey. Let's get to Nico on line 5. Nico, are you there? Nico.
Χαίρετε, and I want to say Christos for credit to the professor and you my super father Christos Anesti.
Alithos Anesti, Nico. What, you're calling from New York City?
I am right now on 80th and 2nd Avenue.
Good. Well,
and
park your car and give us your commentary.
Is it sunny there?
Well, the commentary is that I was born in 43, father, 1943, December 6th, my name date.
In Greece.
Of course, in the glorious Sparta, and I don't remember much.
Do you remember the Nazi occupation?
Father, would you believe that in my vague mind, I have pictures of the German soldiers in Sparta and outside of Sparta there, but I cannot recognize faces, but they were there. I've seen it with the boots and everything. But I remember more the Civil War was more dreadful, more pathetic.
The Civil War that wrapped Greece directly after the victory.
That was
yes.
worse than the Nazis invading our country. Much worse.
We also had the Italian occupation, if you remember.
Which one?
The Italian occupation. The Italians came first.
Of course.
But the Greeks pushed them back. The Greeks pushed them back into Albania. And then the Italians had to run and get the Germans to help them out. And it was the conjoining, the solidarity of all freedom-loving people in the world that brought down fascism. And it's going to have to be the same way if we're going to defeat again this double-ended serpent with two heads, a head at one end and a head at the other end. There's no tail, and that is the serpent of terrorism.
That's what I want to say, Father.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, I'm going to speak to you next week also.
Okay.
What I'm going to say is sadly that after all these atrocities, all the First and Second War, the Korean War, Vietnam, what have we learned as human beings?
Well, I'm going to ask that question to Professor Sergey. Thank you, Nico, for calling. Professor Sergey, what has Russia done as an American ally on the war on terror? The war on terror that has engulfed the entire world.
Well, I think we already mentioned our last program about President Bush and President Putin. They met in Bratislava, and the terrorism, this issue, was one of the main issues there. And personally, I think that there has been significant cooperation between the United States and Russia in this war on terror. Russia did work with Americans very closely in the initial phases in the war in Afghanistan against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban tyrants. And of course, there were differences in Iraq, with Iraq, etc., etc. But we have to put these differences behind us in order to work better together and with other European and non-European allies in building a free and democratic world.
And a safe one as well.
Yes.
To be free and democratic is not enough. We must be a safe world, secure.
Safe world.
If I may, because time is running out very rapidly, what is President Putin's position in regard to the ever-growing opinion that Russia is trying to reclaim its dominant role, certainly in Europe and certainly in the world?
Well, why not? Why not? Any country wants to dominate, first of all. I mean, think about the Great Britain or the feeble France, etc., etc. It's a national instinct in a way. It's a national surviving instinct, or it's part of your surviving ethics. You have to be street smart in any situation, whether it's big, small, medium-sized, extra large, as they say in the United States,
but
or
is
extra small.
Is President Putin pushing Russia as a world dominant figure?
I think so.
Yeah, and I would
so.
think it's within his province to do so.
Yes.
Just as much as Bush is pushing America, and maybe we don't need so much pushing because we're already there, but there are other nations. Every nation wants to self-adulation, to offer itself as a dominant feature in the area.
And that's why many of the former Soviet republics are fearful of the Russian, again, not Soviet, but the Russian aggressive tactics on their border. But again, don't forget, Russia is not taking over anybody now.
Let's mention Georgia. Let's mention Georgia. Georgia does not did not respond to this invitation to go to Moscow, and they made conditions. They said unless the Russian armies that are based in Georgia, unless they are removed, they would not participate in the celebratory festivities in Moscow. Is that a fact?
It's a fact, but again, I think one of the Russian spokesmen replied in a very nice and peculiar manner. You are invited. You are more than welcome to come. But if you don't want to come, don't come. You know, there are no conditions and no limits whatsoever.
Exactly.
It's like, you're invited to this marriage ceremony. there are no conditions.
Our
Just
number
come
here
on
is 718-204-8900, 718-204-8900. Give us your call so we can get your commentary on the May 8th and 9th celebrations in Moscow. 50 nations, 50 heads of nations, including the United Nations, the United States and, of course, the European Union will be in Moscow with President Putin, President Bush, and other dignitaries celebrating the end of World War II. Tell us about certain steps toward democracy that have taken place in Europe after World War II by the Russians.
Well, I think first of all we have to mention the United Nations. People of the world, including Russia, and Russia was the biggest part of this because of the sacrifices, because of the quantity, wanted to inspired of the defeat of this Hitler coalition to establish a global mechanism for safeguarding peace and security. Again, the United Nations Organization. I believe the Soviet Union, as the Soviet Union, and Russia still plays a big part there. Its charter, again, the United Nations Charter, became a generally recognized basis of contemporary international law. I stress your attention and our listeners' attention here. International law and a fundamental code of conduct for states and international organizations. The principles and standards of this charter, which stood the test of the Cold War, I believe, today are an alternative basis for shaping a new, secure world pattern for the era of globalization. We are all global now. We have McDonald's everywhere, Father Eugene, Big Macs. But again, we
have McDonald's everywhere, but we don't have pierogi stands.
Unfortunately. No. The point that I'm trying to make...
We have borscht in Brighton Beach, Professor. Borscht.
Brighton Beach?
Brighton Beach, borscht.
Brighton is in the United Kingdom.
Kielbasa. We're down to the last couple of minutes before we have to... There's so much more to discuss on this issue, but we have no time. We're always out of time. But let me just... let's echo some wonderful words from President Truman. President Truman, who made a broadcast nationwide on this date, May 8th at 9 a.m. and said, this is a solemn and glorious hour. We must work to bind up the wounds of a suffering world and to build an abiding peace, a peace rooted in justice and law. And then our friend across the sea, Churchill, went on the air telling his audience throughout the British Commonwealth, we must allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. Let us not forget for a moment the toil and effort that lies ahead. Japan, with all her treachery and greed, remains unsubdued. So although the war ended in Europe, there was still the war in the Pacific with Japan, and that was yet to come.
Let me just add again a couple of quotes from the most famous Russian General Zhukov and your lovely FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I quote, I have seen the war, period. I hate the war. End of quote. And I think that's what...
Zhukov said that.
Absolutely, together, when they drank vodka. Now, just to get back to our serious program, I think that's what we've been trying to discuss during this program, and that's what we have to talk about.
And I think I would tend to think if I were Bush and you were Putin, I would tend to think that first and foremost on both of our minds is the security of our individual nations and then collectively the security of the world against terrorism. Terrorism is the new fascism of the 21st century because it's an intolerance, it's a barbaric instrument used against all peoples at all places, of all ages, of all colors, of all creeds. And as long as you don't believe as I believe and think as I believe, you can be eliminated. And that was Hitler's ideology.
Think about the Beslan school tragedy last September in Russia. Think about 9/11.
How about the theater in Moscow?
Yes.
And how many? Think of what happened right here in New York City, the World Trade Center. Can we ever forget what happened to us? And lest we forget, history will repeat itself. I want to thank my wonderful speaker again, Professor Sergey Grushchin of St. Petersburg, an instructor of advanced technology who's been with us again. You're a welcomed and a refreshing speaker for our program. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Father Eugene. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Let us not forget to tell our people in your language and in mine, this is the season that we say Christos Anesti,
Alithos Anesti.
Christos Voskresie.
Воистину воскресе.
Christ is risen.
Truly, He is risen.
I want to thank you once again. And this is Father Eugene Pappas with Cosmos FM right here at 91.5 saying goodbye, New York, goodbye, world.
Pascha.
You have been listening to Matters of Conscience, hosted by the Very Reverend Father Eugene Pappas, and brought to you by the support of our audience, anonymous donors, and a contribution from